All right, so we're here to talk about, and you're interested in the Rural Health Transformation Program, recently released RFA number 1.2 from Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. So just, quick agenda here, what we're going to talk about. If you would, we're really interested to know who's here with us. So if you wouldn't mind in the chat box, just putting your name and who you are and where you're located, so we kind of have a sense of who's in the room with us today. But we'll talk about the overall Rural Health Transformation Program and about this specific RFA number 1.2. Talk a little bit about eligibility, the funding details, et cetera, and then talk a little bit about gap funding and take some questions here at the end. So just by way of introduction, so Ben and I are part of Nebraska Extension's Regional Food Systems Initiative. You can see our website here, foodsystems.unl.edu. Lots of things that we cover kind of in the food system space. We're happy to support your individual business. As Ben mentioned, he's got a lot of business training and coaching background. Our team does a lot of work with rural groceries and forming cooperatives, cottage food law, food processing center, just lots of different touch points with across the food system here. So you already introduced yourselves, but I don't know, Randy or Deb, if there's anything else you want to say about your organization.
For those not familiar with the Center for Rural Affairs, I do like to share our mission. I think it well represents who we are. Our goal is to establish strong rural communities, social and economic justice, environmental stewardship, and genuine opportunity for all, while engaging people in decisions that affect the quality of their lives and the future of their communities. And we engage over several different ways through policy at the local, state, and federal level, through lending, which Randy will address today, and policy financial access, helping support entrepreneurs, and then supporting producers, community members, and businesses just like yours. So happy to be here and happy to share more about what we are doing if you have questions later.
Great. Thanks, Deb. All right, and before we kind of launch into the depths of the information here, we just wanted to say up front that neither UNL or the Center for Rural Affairs has any authority to make funding decisions on these funds. This is a Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services funding source. So we're providing this information as guidance based on our understanding of the RFA and the funding that's available, as well as based kind of our collective past experience with federal funding sources. Any final decisions will be made by DHHS, and all kind of use of federal funds will have to align with the CFR 200 and 300, which is the kind of the code, federal code that oversees how federal funds get used. So at the end of the day, if you need some specific things, DHHS is the final decision maker there. So we'll do our best to guide you in the best way that we can, but just know that we're also kind of learning as we go here. All right. So what is the Rural Health Transformation Program? So this is a massive $50 billion federal initiative, really kind of aimed at transforming rural healthcare delivery, improving access, reducing health disparities. Here at the state level, it is an initiative led by, as I said, Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. And each state had the opportunity to apply to the federal government to this program to receive this funding. I believe Nebraska has received in year one here about $220 million, somewhere in that ballpark. And their proposal here at the state level had the purpose of improving health outcomes in rural communities, kind of addressing root causes of health challenges, including access to healthy foods, and supporting innovative community-based solutions. So the state of Nebraska is, now that we have this funding, is kind of allocating out the funding through targeted initiatives like the one we're talking about today. Kind of a lot of it has to deal with, of course, healthcare, but also food systems and kind of community health outcomes. So this initiative one, which is what this RFA is a part of, is kind of geared around improving rural health through food as medicine approaches. So focuses on improving access to healthy local foods in rural communities, addressing food insecurity, obesity, and chronic disease through these food-based solutions. And there's a lot of kind of strategies that they're going to be implementing over this first year here. And some new RFAs will be coming out here pretty soon that will kind of focus on modernizing school kitchens to support more kind of use of fresh whole foods from local producers. Really working on developing regional food systems by connecting producers with food hubs or food pantries and kind of building those relationships between producers and schools, providing nutrition education, promoting healthy behaviors. So it's at a big picture level, really kind of looking at how do we better connect agriculture and food systems with more positive health outcomes, and thinking about, particularly in this RFA, how do we sort of improve the infrastructure that would help rural communities better access healthy foods. So RFA 1.2, here's kind of some details about this one. That's why you're all here today. Application deadline is April 8th, so coming right up here in a couple weeks. What's important to note here, the project period they've stated is actually January of 2026 through July of 2027. So they have mentioned, DHHS has mentioned that if you get funded, it is possible under certain circumstances. This is kind of one of those where you have to check with DHHS on this, but it's possible that you'll be able to include purchases that were made um, after January 1st of this year. So the purpose of this RFA is really about getting more local healthy foods into school cafeterias for students to have access to those healthy foods with the kind of goals of reducing obesity risk and reliance on processed foods. This RFA really kind of targets how do we strengthen those relationships between local foods producers and schools, and kind of supporting the regional development of aggregation hubs to kind of build those relationships and make more reliable delivery of local foods to schools. So some of the things that this funding supports, building or improving aggregation and distribution systems, developing procurement tools for producers, expanding partnerships between producers and schools. And they had this list of who was eligible to apply here included farmers and ranchers, food cooperatives, food pantries, nonprofit organizations, and community gardens were all listed as eligible. We've received a lot of questions about the eligibility piece here over the last couple weeks, and I think there's a lot of kind of gray area there on who is eligible to apply. But this is kind of what DHHS put out. We've been sending questions to DHHS to try to get some clarity on some of those pieces, but that's kind of what we know for now. So what they've mentioned a lot, they had an informational session a couple of weeks ago. DHHS was pretty clear that they're really looking for folks who have established relationships with schools already, or can sort of demonstrate that they can do that, build those relationships quickly to kind of get local products into the schools. And just as a reminder, this is a rural health transformation program, so they are really targeting those rural school districts across the state. Rural and frontier county is what they mentioned. So another important thing to note that this is a reimbursement grant. With federal funds, this means that you would have to go out and purchase with your own money the whatever, equipment or whatever you plan to do with these funds, and then submit receipts to DHHS, and then they get reimbursed for those purchases from the federal grant. And so this is where Center for Rural Affairs, we'll talk a little bit here. Randy will share some information about their bridge loan opportunities. Could be a good option for folks who need some support, kind of cash flowing purchases like this.
And there's a
Okay.
couple of questions
Yep.
in the
Sure.
chat. Do you want to take those now or wait to the end?
Um, let's see. Yes. Why don't we go ahead and take them now?
So what's the definition of rural?
So yeah, really good question. And I think there might be some information on DHHS website. I think the federal definition is less than 50,000 population is considered rural. And what they said at their information session was that 88 of the 93 counties in Nebraska qualify as either rural or frontier counties. So I'm pretty sure everything except Douglas, Sarpy, Lancaster, Hall County, maybe,
Mhm.
and maybe one other. So pretty most of the state would qualify as rural. I think we're still kind of trying to get some clarity from DHHS on, there are school districts in those counties that are outside of the urban areas that I would think would qualify as rural, but I'm not sure if they're doing that on a county basis or if it's by the actual school district. But 88 of the 93 counties are considered rural frontier. So that's kind of what they're targeting. All right. Sorry, I'm not seeing the chat. Was there another question in there?
Yeah, so if we're in those non-rural counties, will we not qualify, or do we just need to demonstrate that we're working with rural counties?
Yeah, my understanding on that, Chloe, a good question is that, yeah, you just need to demonstrate that you're working with those rural communities or schools. So, yeah, and I even asked, and I think, I think what I heard from DHHS is if you've got experience working with an urban school district, I think that's important to put in your application, because it shows that you do have relationships with schools and kind of have that experience. But just, make sure that you're able to demonstrate that you are targeting rural school districts with this funding, or it would help you expand to rural schools with this funding.
Can funds be used for leased or shared cold storage and logistics systems, or is the purchase of equipment preferred?
That is
So
a
leased
really
or
good question.
purchased.
Yeah, good question. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one? If not, we can ask DHHS.
I think we'll have to ask DHHS.
Okay.
I don't have a good answer on that either. I think everything has been around purchasing equipment, but I do think that leasing is a good option that they could consider that we should ask.
Typically, that is allowable in a lot of grant funding sources. So, yeah, we will ask that. Good question.
I might just say, as we're kind of going through these, you may hear us say we don't know a number of times. So one of the things I wanted to just point out is that we have maybe a little bit better access to DHHS than maybe some of you. If you're just an individual calling up, we may have a stronger connection there. So these questions, even though we may say we don't know now, it gives us the opportunity to go back and ask those questions and maybe get a quicker response than you might if if you just try to, call yourself. Not saying you shouldn't, but just because you hear us say we don't know yet, it allows us to go back and ask multiple things at once and maybe get some answers pretty quickly.
Good deal. Yeah, and I see a question from Ben here about are schools or FFA programs eligible into to apply? I think that's a really good question. There are going to be some RFAs coming out here really soon that are specifically for schools. So my sense is that this one is not eligible for schools to apply. But I think that's a really good question.
He does have a follow-up there, Ben. Did you see that about, or just that follow-up is that problem is that small schools don't have the capacity to
Yeah.
process local produce. And I would say Ben hints that one of the RFAs that will be coming out is, or grant opportunities will be for schools to expand their ability to expand the equipment in their kitchen and expand their ability to process. So we hope that's their goal is to be expanding school capacity at the same time as they're expanding um, farmer and produce capacity.
Yep. All right. So, kind of big picture takeaway here. So, this one focuses on connecting local food systems again with schools to kind of generate better health outcomes. Really looking to build infrastructure for aggregation, distribution, and local procurement at schools. And again, this is just part of a bigger effort to improve rural health through food access. Um, so, as we mentioned, this is kind of year one. This funding is designed to be 5 years of funding. Obviously, there's no guarantees on that. We've seen this last year a lot of federal grants and funding sources be kind of topsy-turvy, so it's not a guarantee, but if you're not currently working with schools, this is a pretty good area to consider expanding your market access here, because are anticipating right now that there will be 4 more years of this funding, meaning what they've said right now is this 1.2 RFA, there will be 10 million a year for the next 4 years in this specific funding source. So good opportunity for folks there.
So Ben, do we have a timeline of the other RFAs? And just this person's wanting to know if this is the only opportunity. I guess you just kind of talked about that this is a 5-year deal.
Yeah.
But do we have a timeline of the other RFAs?
I know that like the one for the school kitchen modernization is really close to coming out. I would say probably in the next month to 2 months, that one should be released. There are a couple of the areas of this funding that Nebraska Department of Education is going to be overseeing, like specifically these ones that target schools and their kind of kitchen improvement needs. So they are kind of going to be the overseers of those funding applications. Um, I know they're moving pretty quickly. My understanding is that DHHS has to get a good amount of these dollars out the door by September. So I would expect in the next month or two, we should see some more of these kind of school targeted RFAs. Um, is this the only RFA for this year in the food as medicine? I don't think so. I think for this 1.2, yes, this will be the only one for this year on this specific one. But within that initiative one, there will be several other RFAs coming out this year yet. I'm not quite sure when, but hopefully in the next month or two.
One other question, can projects focus on introducing value-added local products, or is it priority given to raw ag products?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As far as I know, there's no restrictions on that. I haven't seen anything that says it cannot be a value-added product. I think as long as it's, kind of a locally sourced healthy foods and it's going into schools and schools are buying it, that's kind of their target. There has been some information. I think the overall state of Nebraska Rural Health Transformation Program, some of their objectives the biggest level were around kind of local protein sources. But I didn't see anything in the RFA or what I've heard from DHHS that says it has to be kind of raw, unprocessed foods. And then as far as Jordan asked about needing letters of support, I didn't see anything either, Jordan, that said they were looking for letters of support or needed that as part of applications.
It wasn't required. And it might be something we follow up on, Ben, as a way to
Yeah.
demonstrate if you don't currently have a partnership with the school that you have support, like actionable
Mhm.
support. So I think that's something we should follow up on.
Yes, good point. All right. And so if you haven't seen it yet, so this is kind of an image of the application document itself. It's actually an Excel spreadsheet. We'll go through the questions here. It's available on the DHHS website. We'll also happy to email this out to everybody who's registered for this webinar. Yeah, it's basically kind of pretty simple, actually, of an application. So top, just kind of some basic information about yourself or your business, and then it kind of has 6 questions. So we'll kind of take a look at these. So here's the first 3 questions: provide a detailed description of the entity's partnerships with local school systems. Again, really kind of emphasizing what are your existing relationships? How have you worked with schools in the past? And then describe your readiness and ability to partner with local school systems to achieve the identified strategic goals and outcomes. And then they ask for some information regarding your infrastructure. So think of this as, kind of them sort of looking for some real details on how what kind of an entity are you? Are you a producer, a nonprofit, a food pantry? Um, what are your current services and partnerships that you have? And because this is rural focused, how do you currently support rural Nebraska with what you do? Um, and then the last three questions. So describe the need for funds. How will the funds be used to meet the strategic goals and outcomes in the RFA? How will they support sustainability of the strategic goals? And then in this one, you want to include a time frame in which the funds will be utilized. Keep in mind that the time period for this is January of 2026 through July of 2027. So you'll have to make sure you've expended all your funds by the end of July of next year. They ask about how will you measure the effectiveness of the use of funds to achieve the strategic goals and identified outcomes. So here you want to really make sure that you've got some very clear, measurable goals associated with the funding you're requesting. So you want to make sure you're saying something to the effect of you will like increase the number of schools you're selling to from 5 to 10, or you might say something like increasing the total poundage of produce that you're selling by 20%. Something that's very specific, very targeted, that can actually be measured and you can demonstrate in your reporting to DHHS that you've achieved what you set out to achieve. And then ask for some information about the fiscal information about the entity. So, what is your experience managing federal funds? So, if you've ever had a value added producer grant or any other sort of USDA producer grant, definitely list that. Entity's annual total budget, and then talk about your staff to include level of experience. So there you want to really make sure that you're indicating that you have kind of the expertise on board to, make sure you're managing the funds correctly, that you're, spending the funds according to the rules, you're able to report out to them and kind of do the managerial thing, that you got some expertise on your staff. So. Um, all right. Pause there. Any questions? Yes, DJ, I see your question there. Yes, we will have Q&A section here at the end and absolutely open it up for questions. For food purchases. No, Chloe, I don't think so. At least in this RFA, they were very specific that you cannot use the funds to purchase food. Um, we'll see, I guess I see your question about, yeah, will the schools in the future RFAs? I'm doubting that they will allow schools to use the funds to purchase food. I would be surprised. Typically, federal funds, it's really kind of tricky to buy food with federal dollars. Obviously, the LFS and the LFPA dollars from the last couple of years are an exception to that, but generally, it's kind of hard to do that. So I would doubt it, but we'll have to wait and see what that RFA looks like. All right, and then also part of the application, this is another tab on that spreadsheet. It's just for your point of contact, so you can just list who in your business or organization is the point of contact and what their job titles and contact information is. Um, and then they ask for several kind of supporting documents. Not all of these are going to be relevant for everybody who's applying. A certificate of insurance, obviously, most folks would have that. They do ask for an audit report or audit monitoring report. These are typically for nonprofit organizations. So if you're a small business owner, you probably would not have these, and that's okay. You can just put they do ask for a detailed explanation if you don't have these things. Um, I think just you can just explain in there that that's not, you're not a nonprofit organization and you don't have any audit reports unless you do, and then you can share that, of course. If you have any federal awards from the last 5 years, again, these might be, the Regional Food System Infrastructure Funds or the Value Added Producer Grant or anything like that. You, of course, would want to share that. Um, Indirect cost rate. Most folks won't have a federally approved indirect cost rate agreement unless you're a nonprofit, so that's not necessary. They do allow for 7.5% indirect cost for this funding. So we can talk about that a little bit more, what that looks like. Um, your signed W-9 for most recent tax year, you should have, and then agency cost allocation plan. Again, that would most likely be for kind of a nonprofit agency, and most businesses would not have that. Oh,
And
correct.
doesn't
Yeah.
a W-9 just state um like your TIN on it or your taxpayer identification number?
Doesn't it, would it state that? I'm sorry, say that again?
The like them requesting the W-9 is just kind of confusing to me because it's like basically you state your entity name, your location, and then your taxpayer identification number. So that's the form that they want us to attach, right?
I think that's right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and Chloe makes a good point here. Thank you, Chloe, because in that agreements with federal funding, they are saying if it has been terminated for cause, so if you had federal funding that was terminated for some reason, misallocation of funds or something like that, that's what they're looking for there, not just any funds that you've had. So thank you, Chloe, for pointing that out. Okay. So that's kind of the main part of the application. We can, this is a screen grab of the budget form. Uh, and so this is the budget sheet. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, we can pull it up here a little bit later, but it's a pretty I don't know. It's kind of a intimidating document. So this first tab on this document, this Excel spreadsheet, has a lot of kind of information about how to fill everything out. You can see along the bottom there are separate tabs for each category of the budget where you will have be putting proposed amounts in there. It's all kind of set up to feed into the second tab there. That's the budget justify. So you really kind of use those reddish tabs to fill in what you're proposing, do you want the funds for, and it'll kind of create the formal budget for you. Um, it's kind of hard to display on this, but we can pull it up and answer specific questions about this as we go forward. I would also say this might be something where you might want to meet with somebody one-on-one to kind of talk through your budget if you have questions about it, and we can help you try to get it figured out and filled out in the right way. So just a note about SAM.gov and the UEI. So SAM.gov is the federal website where you have to be registered in SAM.gov to receive federal funding. And part of that is requesting a unique entity identification number or UEI. All federal awardees need to have a UEI. Um, and so this is something, if you've never done this before, we've got some guides that we can share out that kind of walk through the process of doing this. It's a little bit tricky, but it's doable. Um, it's not clear. DHHS has not clarified whether you have to have the UEI at the time of applying for these funds, but you will definitely need it if you are awarded funds. So if you've got the time and you can start on this now, all the better. And we can kind of help guide you through that process. All right. All right. So I'm gonna turn it over to Randy here and let him talk about Center for Rural Affairs lending opportunities.
Sure. Thank you, Ben. So as you think about this grant program, let's say you're awarded the $80,000 but it's a reimbursement grant, which means the way it's set up is that you need to spend the money and then ask to have it reimbursed. So if you have 80,000 laying around to do that with, all good and fine. We recognize that in many instances that won't be the case, that it would be nice to have some funding to be able to spend upfront, create the receipts and the invoices and the paperwork necessary, then submit that into the entity, the granting entity, to get reimbursed. So we've created, in addition to our ongoing, longer term business loans, we have basically a bridge loan product. So it's kind of a much quicker underwriting process because we're just kind of looking at the grant money to be the source of repayment for the loan. So we do a very light loan application process. It's still your business. You're still going to ask you to fill out some stuff, but not nearly as thoroughly as if it was a longer term business loan. And then be able to fund that to you, whether that's as you create an invoice for us, maybe. I mean, we're not necessarily going to write you a check for $80,000. And that's getting into some details. But instead, if you have something, okay, hey, I'm ready to buy this piece of equipment. Here's the invoice for it. We'll pay it. That kind of a thing. So we have a lot of flexibility. If your overall project that you're envisioning is bigger than 80,000, where maybe part of it is, you're putting some money in, you're anticipating this $80,000 grant, but you also need some additional, maybe longer term fundings. We'll also have the flexibility to look at kind of a combination where part of it might be a grant, I'm not grant, but this gap loan or this bridge loan. And then another part might be a longer term for the building out of the rest of the project. So you can see here on the screen a number of different items, or as we put sources and uses or potential uses for some of the funds. So I'm not going to read them all off, but that bottom one there, gap financing to complement state or federal grant programs, is exactly what we're thinking might be a big help to anybody here. Next slide. Loan sizes, and you don't need to do the whole 80, right? If you only need a portion of it. The other thing that and Deborah, Ben, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that if you do have some capital and you just wanted to do 10,000 at a time and you're going to do it internally so you don't need any financing at all, and you're going to make multiple disbursement requests to the granting agency, that's okay too. So if you don't need a loan, that's fine. We just want this tool to be here for you. I'll just stop for a second and ask, am I correct in assuming that they can do multiple reimbursement requests as best we know?
Through DHHS, right?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah, you spend some money, you buy a piece of equipment, then you submit for reimbursement and
Right.
kind of keep doing that. I
Yep.
think they had mentioned maybe quarterly was what they were thinking in their information
Okay.
session. So you can
Gotcha.
request reimbursement at least that
Yep.
frequently.
All right. As you can see, the bridge loan is a short-term loan, 9 months. We want to give you plenty of time to spend the money, and that term can change if indeed you're going to have, if we longer to spend for this grant, we'll match the loan term to be the grant term so that you're okay there. We can deal with little blips in credit, okay. Again, case by case basis, but as it says down there, no charge-offs or collections. And then we'll do the standard placing of a UCC lien on business assets. Let's go to the next slide, and then whether there's questions along the way or at the end is perfectly fine. Again, this kind of gives you a mapping of what I've said verbally of what is our process. Our website, which we can put on here for the loans page on our website, has an application there that you could get going, and that kind of takes care of that left-hand column. Then we'll acknowledge it and we'll say, hi, and give you a checklist of the other things we might need. And then internally, we'd go through the process in that third column of taking it to through a streamlined approval process. Next slide. And then there's our information there. And then I will put over in the chat the loans page on our website, where you can actually go and read more about all our different products. If you wanted to actually start an application at some point, that link is in there as well. But I think, again, Ben, I'll turn it back over to you to see how you want to manage questions.
Yeah, no problem. Well, we're just about to the end of our slide, so why don't we just wrap that up and then we'll let folks come off mute and they can ask any questions. So If you would like to get some help going forward with your application, I'm happy to meet with folks. You can use this QR code that'll take you to a booking page. You can find a time on my calendar that works for you, and we'll kind of talk through your proposal or any questions you might have. I'll ask Ben and Deb if you don't mind putting your emails in the chat box here, and folks can contact them as well. Looks like Randy's got his information in there. So feel free to reach out to us. We'll shoot out an email to everybody after this webinar with some of these links and whatnot. So you can stay in touch with us. And then here's kind of some more information. So this email address, dhhs.rhtp1@nebraska.gov, that is how you will submit your application. So which is due April 8th by 11:59 p.m., they said. So it's not an online portal. You don't upload it anywhere. You're just emailing it the work plan and the budget document. Those Excel spreadsheets are what you're emailing directly to that email address. There's their website for the RFA and some of the kind of rural health transformation program information on the DHHS website. So they suggest that you subscribe to those web pages to receive email notifications when new information becomes available. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing here and look at the chat. I think we got,
I know DJ had
yeah,
a question about specific question about
yes,
Cumming County.
sure. Yeah, DJ.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ben, and thanks for the presentation. And I kind of got put onto this from one of our board members. I think she's listening, Eunice. So just one of my thoughts and just investigating this, not knowing much about it. I think I got the answer. You can't purchase food products with this,
Correct.
correct?
Yep.
I was
That
just
is,
thinking we have a current really great partnership with the Cumming County Feeders.
yep.
They provide fresh beef to our schools every month, and I know that's getting more and more expensive. And I didn't know if there was a way through our partnership that they could apply for a potential grant to maybe help fund some of that donation of beef to our school districts. So that was my general
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And they do spell out in the RFA and elsewhere that these funds cannot be used to purchase food. So we've got somebody else had asked a couple days ago whether or not these funds could be used for the processing costs of animals. And so we sent that on to DHHS and kind of waiting to hear about that. But yeah, I would encourage the Cumming County feeders to think about this proposal if they need, some freezer storage or, if they need a new vehicle to transport or if there's anything along those lines that would enhance their capacity to serve the schools, that would be a good option for them.
Great. That'd be great if you find out about the processing too and could drop
Yeah.
me a note. Maybe that'd be awesome because I know that is definitely a cost to them all the time. So,
Yep. You
all
bet.
right.
Well,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
thank you. Birdwood beef. Yeah, did you want to come off mute and ask specifically about that or your eligibility?
I can.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So I'm not quite sure how Birdwood beef fits underneath this eligibility requirements because yes, it's our meat from start to finish, but we separated off from the parent company of Star Cattle Company to create Birdwood beef. And so therefore looking at Birdwood as the entity, we're not the producer.
Right.
And we had trouble with that with the value added producers grant too. Do we
Okay.
need to go back to what we planned on where we buy the live animal, feed it, incur all those costs to become the producer? Because we're not necessarily, I don't, does Birdwood fall under the food co-op where we're not
Hmm.
really, we're kind of in this weird gray area because of how we set up the LLCs.
I see. Yeah, good question. And so, but Birdwood and the other LLs, you're related, right? I mean, that's
I mean, it's the same owners, Star Cattle
same owner.
Company and Birdwood Beef are all the same,
Mostly.
mostly the same. I
Yeah.
mean, so I just were Birdwood looking at them at the LLC specifically. You really can't pin us as that company is the producers.
Hmm.
They
Interesting
be
question. Yeah.
considered a value added, Ben? I mean, in that instance, because it's
Could be.
like a added ag producer, then you could fall under that category. Are you,
Maybe.
I mean, how are you, is your main function to market it, or do you deal with the processing at all?
We
Or,
don't do any of the processing.
okay.
We're just we take our meat, we raise the animals through Star Cattle Company,
Mhm.
then we take it to have processed and we come back and sell it in our storefront in North Platte. We're currently partnered with a local school in the area
Mhm.
already,
Hmm.
but would love to have some more schools in the
Yeah.
Yeah.
area to partner with. We stumble in this position because we're not sure we fit under the eligibility requirements to
Yeah.
Mhm.
even move past any of that, to put in the work to write the grant and say, oh, you're not the producer, when we are,
Right.
but it's not Birdwood. And Star Cattle Company has no reason to apply for these grants because it's not the one selling the meat.
Mhm.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
we
Yeah.
kind of fall. I would like to, I guess I would like to maybe see a definition of the value added side
Mhm.
of that to see if we fit,
Yeah.
see if we
Yeah.
fit those requirements, I guess.
Yeah, because you may not, since you wouldn't be.
Right.
Yeah, but I do like your idea of the food cooperative. Oh, Ben, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say I could make a an argument that you would be an aggregator or a hub,
Hmm.
in that you are not, and you might be able to get yourself even more, make more of a case if you were bringing in beef from other people as well, and marketing that. But I could see how you could say that you're a hub or something like that where you're distributing beef.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
and
we're so scared to go move forward with some of these when they, throw our application to the side right away because we don't fit their eligibility
Mm.
requirements. So,
and they
Yeah.
are looking for last mile logistics. I mean, that's what you're providing. Is that
Mhm.
almost, I mean, like you're providing that logistics from.
right.
So I think you would be eligible. We would just have to ensure that the entity that you are listing is one that makes sense to DHHS.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that that makes sense to me. I mean, I think there again, there's a difference between being eligible and being awarded funding, right? So I think you're eligible to apply. And I like what Deb and Ben are describing there. I think you present yourself as, yeah, that aggregator who's doing the last mile logistics and delivery.
Okay.
You've got this close partnership with the producer, your
And
related
with the school,
businesses.
yeah.
Yeah, and you've got some established relationships with schools. I think that's a pretty good fit. Whether or not they will fund it is always a question mark,
Right.
right? So,
And I heard you say vehicles are like, that's not out of, because I feel the
yeah.
last one we did, anything, it couldn't be with wheels, couldn't be,
Oh, okay.
um,
Yeah, our understanding is that the distribution vehicles are allowable and
okay.
part of what they're looking to fund. And I know several folks are interested in that and planning to apply for refrigerated or
Right.
other vehicles to
Okay.
distribute their products. So,
Okay.
You're probably a
I guess,
dedicated vehicle, not a general, not a
yes,
general pickup, but a vehicle dedicated to distribution. Yeah.
yes.
okay.
We don't. We could.
Okay. That's all the questions I have
Okay.
right now.
Yeah, thank you. Question from Chloe in the chat. Can you apply each year, even if you were granted funds in previous years? Yes, good question. We did want to mention that. Our understanding is yes, that each year you will be able to apply again, even if you were awarded funds in the first year. So you just cannot go over $80,000 in one year, is what they have said. To what extent can funds support staff time for coordination, training, and program implementation within the 7.5% admin cap? Yeah, so good question. My understanding is, and folks correct me if you have a different interpretation here, but there is a line in the budget for salary time, staff time. So I don't think it has to fit within the 7.5% admin, but you can add staff time as part of your budget. on top of the 7.5% admin cost. Because the admin cost, my thought on that is that that is to kind of manage the grant, manage those funds, the reporting, and that kind of stuff. If you have, like, for example, staff time needed to, if you were going to buy a piece of equipment and you had to drive and go pick it up, you could charge the staff time to do that and to find the equipment that you're looking for. I don't know if others want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, the indirect costs also encompass the office space, the electricity, the telephone. So that's all within that 7.5%. So you may have for example, the Center for Rural Affairs has a higher indirect cost rate than 7.5% that we would normally include in a grant, but we cannot because it's limited to 7.5% because we just have more expenses that go toward operations than that. And so that's just for you to know. But yes, with Ben, you can still charge your um, staff time for coordination, that type of thing. It's just keeping in mind what your indirect costs are.
Yeah, yeah, good question. Jordan asks, is there a place to provide a quote or is that not necessary? I would just put that right into the narrative, Jordan. If you've got a quote, just indicate where you got it from, and I would guess you could add an attachment, if you had like a printed out PDF or something like that, where you got the quote from. But I would put it into the actual questions in that Excel spreadsheet and just state, we have identified this vehicle. We've got a quote from wherever, and here's what it is, and that's kind of what we're targeting. I mean, I think they didn't ask for it, so I didn't see a space anywhere that says, put in your specific quotes here. I would assume that they'll ask for that if you're awarded funding, but can't hurt to have it at the application point. Chloe asked, can it be used for hiring a salesperson? Um, I mean, I guess I don't see why not. I mean, I think yeah, I mean, if you have kind of certain number of hours per week for a salesperson as an employee of yours for this project, for contacting schools, and making those sales and building those relationships, I would see that as allowable. What do you think, Deb?
I agree. Chloe, we talked about doing this from the center perspective of like, how cool would it be to have a value chain coordinator or use the funding for that? Our only hesitation, well, it was 7.5% indirects, but
Right.
also the fact that it's just for 1 year, so you're not guaranteed funding after that. I mean, but you can reapply for that funding, absolutely. But I think it's a great idea and something that's absolutely needed.
Mhm. Yeah, great questions, everyone. Thank you. Let's take a look here.
So Deb, can you clarify that again? So hiring a salesperson, that would have to come under the 7.5 administrative costs?
No, it would just be it would not have to. You could use that full 80,000 if you wanted to. It's just that when we hire, and Randy, you can help me on this too, but when we hire someone, they have an indirect cost rate that comes along with them because we get them a cell phone and we get them all of these extra things outside of their salary. And so our indirect cost rate is significantly higher than 7.5%. So we would have to pay for those things out of pocket. And so we'd have to determine because we wouldn't be covered through this grant, if that makes sense. Does that make
Yeah,
sense,
gotcha.
Randy?
Yep.
Okay.
That was just your decision through the
Yes,
center, but
our
the
decision. Yep.
but the
But for
80,000
you,
funding, we could just say we're hiring a salesperson, we're paying them $80,000 a year, and
absolutely. And they
okay.
deal with it from there. Like if they're a contractor in particular, like they have a
Mhm.
1 year contract with you,
Mhm.
then they would be used to, because I've been a contractor before, they would be used to dealing with their own insurance, their own, they have to deal with their own phone. They have all of their own expenses that have to come from that contract. So you wouldn't have to worry about all that indirect stuff.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you do it. I think it's a great idea. Whatever you do will be great. And what everyone will do will be great.
All right, question here from Ben. Where does construction designation end and equipment like a cooler that needs to be built begin? This is a really good question, and one that, definitely want to clarify with DHHS, but, when we had business builder grants a couple years ago, what we were told is that construction is anything that is ground disturbing or that involves pouring of concrete. So if you're going to level the ground, or like let's say you were going to build a cooler facility or like a little outbuilding to put your freezers in, as soon as you like disturb the ground or pour concrete, that is considered construction. And by federal rules, you have to get an EPA assessment. It just triggers a whole bunch of other stuff. But at least the way we understood it, and again, we'd want to clarify with DHHS on this one, but if, let's say, you bought a new freezer and you were putting it inside an existing building that just needed some framing around it, or maybe you needed like a new electrical outlet for that freezer, that would could be paid for as part of the cost of the equipment.
Or a pre-built shed or a container that just comes in, they drop it in your location. That seems to be okay as well.
Yeah.
Or here's an example of you maybe describing a project that's bigger than the parts that are eligible here, and so you would use a second loan or the second piece of the loan from a different source for a longer term if you need or want Center for Rural Affairs to look at the construction or the installation or whatever else that might not be eligible under the grant itself, and just keep those grant funds for the part that is eligible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So use these funds to buy the actual equipment and, find funds in a different way, or use your own cash to kind of do the install. Good questions. And we've got just a couple minutes here. Any last questions from the group?
I was just going to make a note because I know there might be some folks on the call who might be interested. We're asking DHHS as well if grocery stores, rural independent grocery stores could also be eligible. They're not explicitly eligible. Food cooperatives are, and some grocery stores are food cooperatives, but we have talked about grocery stores, especially in central and western Nebraska, serving as aggregators or serving in lots of different ways as part of that food system and movement in the food system. So we're waiting on that determination. So as soon as we know, we'll try and get that shared out with folks in that arena.
Sounds good. All righty. Well, we appreciate you all joining us today. Thank you so much. It's been great to hear your questions. We will shoot you an email here in a little bit with the documents for the application and some of these links that were mentioned, so you can follow along. Reach out if you have questions along the way, and best luck on your applications. I hope you all are able to get some funding. Thank you for joining us.